Welcome to this special edition of I-24 News Defense with an in-depth look at the latest developments on Operation Protective Edge. 36 days since the conflict erupted, the truce between Israel and Hamas seems to progress 3 days at a time as the delegations work on a long-term solution. With me now in the studio is Major General in the Reserves Uzi Dayan. Thanks very much for joining me, ex-IDF Deputy Chief of Staff and the former head of Israel's National Security Council. Before we discuss further, a look at the prospect of demilitarizing the Gaza Strip from I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev.
After restoring calm and crushing Hamas, the Israeli Prime Minister has defined one more goal.
The prevention of the arming of a terror organization and the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip must be part of any solution.
Since the beginning of Operation Protective Edge, Jerusalem has been calling to change the strategic reality and end the recurring cycle of violence between Israel and Hamas.
I think you can't get social and economic relief for the people of Gaza without having assured demilitarization.
Instead of the well-known calm for calm, a new formula is gaining momentum: reconstruction for demilitarization, linking any rebuilding of the Gaza Strip to a commitment to empty it of strategic weapons, missiles, rockets, and tunnels, and thus make it more difficult for Hamas to fight a new war. The concept of demilitarization has long been anchored in Israeli-Palestinian agreements and understandings, but is much more difficult to actually implement. Hamas will not disarm and lay down its weapons voluntarily, and a full demilitarization would require Israel to reconquer Gaza and stay there for a long, long time. Instead, Jerusalem is seeking an international mechanism that will supervise and monitor anything that enters Gaza and guarantee that materials and funds do not go to rearming Hamas and other terrorist groups. Any sustainable calm depends on assigning major roles to Egypt and the Palestinian Authority, but will also require the Israeli government to revise its position towards the Palestinian Unity government. If Netanyahu wants a long-term strategic change to be more than a fantasy, he needs to find and accept the missing piece.
And again, joining me in the studio is Mr. Uzi Dayan. I want to begin with you. You've seen your experience from high level in the IDF and the National Security Council from a lot of different perspectives. I want to begin with this report on the demilitarization of Gaza, on this new formula, reconstruction for demilitarization. How realistic do you think that is?
Well, we don't know. From what we see right now, the Hamas violate any ceasefire. We used to say that a ceasefire we seize and they fire. And enough is enough. It's 14 years. So I think the demilitarization of Gaza Strip, it's a minimal requirement. How realistic it is? I'm not sure, because it depends on the Hamas. We have a situation today, we have a kind of a chance because the Hamas is isolated. There are not many friends of the Hamas, only Qatar and Turkey. So if we manage together with the Egyptians and others to really screening everything and not let the Hamas rearmament of the rockets and continue to dig the tunnels and the mortar shelling, etc., this is a minimal requirement. I doubt that it will work because the Hamas have proved themselves of never being part of the solution, but always the problem.
If Hamas has, as you say, proven to not be part of the solution, what do you think about the current negotiations in Cairo? Because Israel is indirectly negotiating with Hamas.
Look, Israel is doing whatever is needed, and we try and try and try again. We were very patient. The Hamas started firing on Israel. We absorbed and absorbed and absorbed. And this government is, believe me, much more far patient than the Israelis and other. But it's a time of enough. Israel will continue to seek for peace. It will go to every negotiation. You can count on it. But in the same time, we need this terrorism to be stopped.
What should Israel be doing differently, do you think, in terms of a long-term solution?
In a long-term solution, if the Hamas continue as is today to be a terror organization, I think the only way is to dismantle the leadership of the Hamas. There are two ways actually to fight terrorism effectively, to defeat a terror organization. One is to threat is territorial base, like the Hamas and Hezbollah as a territorial base, but this is very costly. And the other way is to, let's say it bluntly, to kill the leadership. Not one by one every 2 years.
In the past.
it was done in the past in many, the Badr Meinhof, remember, organization, the Red Army, other organizations. If you go on the head, you go to the leadership and not fight all the hundreds and thousands of terror ways, which are anti-tank missiles and rockets and tunnels and terror groups, etc. I think that this is about time that if the Hamas prove himself not to get the terms of the ceasefire to continue to fire every day, after 14 years, enough is enough, and Israel will have to go and kill the terror leadership.
Mr. Dayan, one of the options you mentioned is really sort of getting Hamas at the core, completely sort of eliminating it. One of the options that's being discussed in Israel, a part of the sort of inner political debate, is reoccupying Gaza. We saw Israeli media Channel 2 reporting on a sort of leaked IDF report showing this would be a very, very costly choice. Is that a choice that Israel should be making?
It is a choice because it seems that there is no other choice. Now, you're right, there is a debate about it in Israel. It's even controversial. It didn't start this way. We left Gaza, we evacuated Gaza to the last inch, gave it to the Palestinian Authority on a silver platter. They lost it to the Hamas, and here the Iranians come, and the Hamas continue to be, Hamas, it's like ISIS with a I don't know, jacket and tie. And everybody knows that. So there is the price that you mentioned. There is a price to it, but there is also a very high price to continue year after year living with this terror. The people who are watching us, imagine yourself to live 14 years with a 20-second alert that you have to find a shelter. And it's true that we defend ourselves pretty good. I mean, but it's not enough after so many years that 3/4 of your country is under threat of rockets. Something has to be done.
When you look at overall then this conflict, you have Israel kind of historically, looking back even just 20 years, you have suicide bombs and then a fence or a wall built. You have rocket fire for 14 years, you have the Iron Dome system. Now the new thing, so to speak, you have a tunnel network coming out of Gaza into Israel, and now already discussion of new technology to detect them, to prevent further tunnels. It seems as if always sort of running after the next threat. In the big picture, is this something that Israel can really do?
True. And it's what you're saying, it's true. Because what? Because we seek for peace and we are very patient. Actually, I think we are too patient. But talking historically, let's see the whole region now. There is a regional war here. It's not only the Hamas. It's the ISIS. It's what's going on in Syria. Iraq is disintegrating. There is a kind of a regional war in the Middle East against terrorism. And it's not only the Israeli citizens who are watching us and asking the government to come with a solution. It's also the people, let's say the government in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt. I feel in a way that that's what they are saying to us. I mean, get rid of it. I mean, give a solution, because we, the other countries, are going to face or facing and going to face the same kind of terrorism, and something has to be done.
I wish we had more time to discuss this and this kind of asymmetrical warfare, but Mr. Uzi Dayan, thank you very much for being with me. Moving now out of the Gaza Strip, throughout the Cold War and since, Washington has acted to protect its interests, even if they were thousands of miles away. Nowadays, American troops are back in Iraq, largely from the air, of course, helping the Kurds counter the advance of the ISIL. Before we discuss, here's a closer look.
I've been very clear that we're not going to have U.S. combat troops in Iraq again. And we are going to maintain that because we should have learned a lesson from our long and immensely costly incursion in Iraq.
As ISIL advances towards Baghdad and across the Jordanian border, U.S. President Barack Obama is starting to understand that military intervention is needed to delay or prevent the fall of Iraq and other U.S. allies to the Islamic fundamentalist group. The president this week ordered the U.S. Air Force to attack ISIL positions, to supply drones and aircraft to the Kurds, and to send humanitarian help to the Yazidis targeted by the Islamist extremist group. But American involvement didn't start in the Obama administration. Only 5 years after World War II, the U.S. fought around 3 years in the Korean Peninsula under the United Nations flag. In the late 1950s and in the 1980s, Marine Special Forces tried to prevent civil war in Lebanon. This attempt ended with a car bomb at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983. And then there was Vietnam. The 15-year conflict and 50,000 casualties changed the minds of U.S. leaders regarding military intervention. Over 1 million troops fought in the war at a price the American public thought too much to fight for, even if it was for freedom and democracy. It took 12 years for another American president to order military intervention with ground troops.
The world has changed. Today, our national security can be threatened in faraway places. It's up to all of us to be aware of the strategic importance of such places and to be able to identify them.
President Ronald Reagan decided to send 1,000 Marines to occupy the island of Grenada in 1983 after a coup appeared to undermine regional stability. In 1989, Reagan's successor, President George H.W. Bush, decided to protect the American interests in the Panama Canal and topple the regime of drug lord Manuel Noriega. He did so with military forces on the ground. With the end of the Cold War, American policy began revolving around international military partnership.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
These types of operations took place in Iraq in 1991 and 2003. In Somalia,
this is our war, not yours.
Haiti, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Libya.
And joining me now on set is Alon Pinkas, Israel's former consul general in New York. Thanks very much, Mr. Pinkas, for being with me. So we just saw the sort of history of U.S. Military involvement in brief. I want to begin with now in Iraq. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry saying very clearly no combat troops will go to Iraq. Yet we have seen American uniform, so to speak, there. Right. What is the nature of U.S. military involvement in Iraq at this point?
To begin with, we could yet still see American ground troops, and it'll be justified on the grounds of changing dynamics and necessity and requirements in Iraq in order to advance or protect interests. So the fact that they're saying, that the administration is saying there won't be any U.S. military presence in or boots on the ground in Iraq doesn't mean it won't change in a week or in a month or in 6 months. That established, the U.S. went out of Iraq, withdrew its entire military forces from Iraq. Yet the U.S. maintained a responsibility, a political responsibility for Iraq. And then came ISIS, or Daesh.
I want to take that then specifically, the U.S. withdrawal. As we've seen the rise of ISIS or ISIL or the Islamic State, right. Several different options these days, there's a lot of criticism at the United States looking back. Some say the U.S. withdrew too soon in 2011. Some say it's because the U.S. was in Iraq in the first place. Others say the U.S. should go back in and completely destroy the ISIL. How do you view policy?
And then you have Norit, President Obama, who said the U.S. should not have invaded Iraq to begin with in March 2003, and he voted against.
So is he just stuck cleaning up the mess? How do you see the current U.S. policy?
It's a good question, because on the one hand, he's stuck cleaning up the mess. On the other hand, it's on his watch. So, he cannot really blame George W. Bush for the mess, because he's 6 years into his presidency. And on the third hand, if such a thing exists, there are new developments. ISIS, IS, call it what you want, did not exist a few months ago, or at least its existence was not closely watched by neither the Americans, nor Israel, nor Russia, nor the Iranians. No one knew where this monstrous amoeba-like organization is coming from and how it's going to advance. So right now what we see is U.S. military operations, primarily aerial, U.S. Navy jets attacking ISIS targets and ISIS convoys and ISIS soldier concentrations. You do see up to, I think, 1,000 uniformed U.S. advisors in Iraq.
An important distinction.
It's an important distinction, but then if we go back...
But who knows how far it will go. So let's take for a moment, I want to zoom out a little bit, if you will, to U.S. policy. On one hand, you see a lot of criticism of Obama, or support, but either way saying he has a very kind of anti-interventionist policy, specifically with Syria. Of course, on the other hand, I understand that his use of drone strikes, for example, is higher than any other president.
Much
so
higher.
How would you classify? Is this a presidency that intervenes?
He is cold. He is a realist. He is ruthless in his ability or proclivity to use force, but he is a non-interventionist. I mean, the drone was invented for a president like this.
Right.
You don't endanger anyone, not even the pilot.
On the ground.
Forget the 82nd Airborne Division, forget tank formations, not even a pilot when you use a drone. And he used drones in places as far away and distinct as Pakistan and Yemen.
You also see the sort of different versions of stories also with U.S.-Israel. You hear the very frosty relationship at best between Netanyahu and Obama. At the same time, very high military support.
Well, here's the thing. Frosty is an understatement because it's really toxic. Frosty would suggest that you can thaw it and it'll
It's beyond
improve.
the thawing point.
It's on a personal level, but that permeates or infiltrates into the structure of the relationship. Yes, military relations are as solid as they have ever been, and military intelligence sharing is as expansive as it ever was. That said, there is a story in this morning's Wall Street Journal, according to which the White House halted supply of air-to-surface Hellfire missiles that Israel asked.
Netanyahu sort of going around the White House to get weapons.
Well, here's the thing. That's where it becomes toxic, Nuit. Netanyahu doesn't have to go through the White House to get these kind of weapon replenishments because there's a process, and the process is via the Pentagon. Yet, given the relationship that he has developed or mismanaged with President Obama, it would have made much more sense to go through the White House and co-opt the White House rather than do what is normal on any other day but was perceived as circumventing.
The phrase biting the hand that feeds you might come to mind.
It's one of the nicest terms available right now.
Mr. Alon Pinkas, thank you very much for joining me today. And that wraps up this edition of I-24 News Defense. For all the latest on the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the efforts to end it, and of course headlines from around the world, find us online at i24news.tv. Thanks for watching.